There's something almost theatrical about watching Nigel Farage trying to grow up politically before our eyes. For decades, he thrived on the role of irreverent outsider, the man who mocked the establishment with a pint in one hand and provocation in the other. But Nick Robinson, in his sharply observed column for the I paper, has noted the shift. The jokes have thinned, the grins have hardened, and the Reform UK leader now seems to want not attention, but authority. The laughter has quietened because the man wants power. Robinson's point is crucial. Farage's latest economic speech was not a performance for applause, but a bid for credibility. Gone were the fantasy giveaways of his previous manifesto, those implausible promises of massive tax cuts alongside higher spending on everything from pensions to the NHS. The Institute for Fiscal Studies eviscerated those plans, warning they didn't add up. And now Farage presents himself as a man of restraint. No large tax cuts at the moment in time, only modest adjustments once the national debt is under control. In other words, he's trying to sound like a chancellor rather than a crusader, but does the rebranding work? Robinson reminds us that Farage's greatest political skill has always been his ability to turn resentment into a grin. He weaponized humour against the political elite, much as Boris Johnson and Donald Trump did. The danger for Farage is that seriousness, when not underpinned by substance, becomes a costume rather than a conviction. And he wants to convince the city that he is not a comic turn, but a credible Prime Minister in waiting. Yet, the sums once again remain unconvincing. It's easy to declare that spending will be cut, far harder to specify where and how deeply without alienating his own voters. The live coverage from today's press conference underlines that tension. Farage insisted he hadn't jettisoned anything, yet his policies have morphed with remarkable convenience. Gone are the grand tax cuts, in their place a mixture of populist grievances and business-friendly nods to deregulation, scrapping net zero subsidies, reviving the North Sea oil industry. He calls it realism, his critics call it retreat, and his claim to substantially cut the benefits bill, particularly through stricter tests for mental health claimants, makes a calculated pivot towards fiscal conservatism that risks alienating younger and economically precarious voters who once saw him as a rebel against austerity. Robinson's piece is ultimately psychological as well as political. He sees in Farage a man haunted by failure. 7 failed parliamentary bids, endless mockery from the establishment, the tag of serial loser. Farage is now 61 with the financial comfort to retire, but he has chosen ambition over ease. It is pride, perhaps vanity, that drives him, the desire to prove his critics wrong, to move from being the joker outside the tent to the Prime Minister within it. He smells power, Robinson writes, and indeed, that scent of proximity may explain why the jokes have dried up. The press and his opponents are right to test the sincerity of this metamorphosis. Labour warns his programme is a return to austerity. The Conservatives call his speech rambling and incoherent. The Lib Dems accuse him of plotting to raid the pockets of pensioners. Yet all this condemnation only amplifies his central claim that the political establishment fears him because he's finally serious. Farage thrives on antagonism. Criticism is his oxygen. The more he is scorned by what he calls the grey suits, the more authentic he appears to his followers. Still, there's an irony that the self-proclaimed insurgent now courts the City of London, praises high earners and promises to invite business magnates into government as advisors. The anti-elite populace now flatters elites, promising that he will be the most pro-business, pro-entrepreneurship government in modern times. The man who once called Westminster a cartel of mediocrities is now asking those same mediocrities to see him as one of their own. Robinson is right to note that such transformations rarely succeed without cost. For every voter who sees maturity, another sees betrayal. Farage's strategy, however, may be shrewder than it appears. By discarding the sugar rush of impossible promises, he positions himself as the truth-teller in the economic gloom. His new message that Britain must tighten its belt and embrace industrial pragmatism could resonate with a weary electorate that no longer trusts optimism. He's also gambling that Rachel Reeves, faced with fiscal constraints of her own, will eventually deliver austerity by another name. If Labour becomes the new custodian of caution, Farage will seek to claim the mantle of angry realism. Nick Robinson's column ends with a challenge. Serious times demand serious answers. The question is whether Nigel Farage can supply them, or whether he is still, at heart, the political showman in search of a stage. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps the serious Nigel and the comic Nigel coexist, one calculating, one mocking, each necessary to the other's success. It would not be the first time in history that a clown has turned out to be the most dangerous man in the circus.